Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. As you saw in the last one, we left the video with a scratched frame and I've just about emotionally recovered and I'm ready to get back into the next bit. So with that aside, we will deal with that later on, but now I just want to focus on finishing the mechanical side, the electrical and everything, and getting this thing running. The engine's been sat here for too long, it ran on the dyno and I'm desperate to get this thing running. So follow along today as we get it all back together and have this thing hopefully run in the garden. Hope you guys enjoy it. And the first item on today's list is getting this headlight back together. So we obviously had the issue of the last one not fitting due to a non-OEM bowl, an aftermarket one that just had slightly different dimensions. So we've gone away, bought the OEM one in red, as that's the only colour you can get, and I've had it sprayed to match the rest of the bike. Not an ideal job for the painter, as he's done it all already, but he did a great job and it matches perfectly. So that bolts on, and then it's just the job of connecting up all these wires in the front end. It is literally colour to colour, so it's hard to get it wrong. And with that new headlight bowl, we have also got a fresh light. I wanted to make sure it all paired up really well, and these lights are still available from the original Honda part, so it was a no-brainer, and I thought let's make sure it all fits together nicely. And in standard project fashion, we have another problem. So the original headlight, which was very nice but not compatible with the new headlight bowl, has a double terminal on the blue wire, and have a guess, my brand new one, which is an OEM one, only comes with a single. Very typical. So I need to find a way to link up those two wires to that single one, and in standard fashion, out of all of the crimps I have, which is quite a lot, I don't have anything to do it. So either going to wait for a double or think of a nice little link lead to link that up. To get round that problem, I have made up a small adapter out of some automotive wire and some crimps. It's not the most motorsport robust thing, but it's sat in a headlight on a 69 bike. It is up to the electrical standards, so I'm more than happy to run this, especially as this bike is probably not going to see a lot of use of this headlight, as I never plan to ride it in the dark. But with that there, we go to put it back on, and I get caught out, as always, by the little bits of tape that come on the painted parts. Where the painter protects the threads, he puts in some tape, and it's so easy to miss these. You get it all together, and then you realise you can't fit the bolt in. But with that done, that bottom screw goes in that I had so many issues with last time, and we can tighten up the headlight bowl at the angle we want. Next up was the throttle, and I've done one of these on the Z50, so was relatively confident I wouldn't have any issues, but in standard fashion we did have a couple little things. So you start off by getting this small threaded part on, and you need to knock this down into the handlebars so it sits flush. We added some grease, and I first noticed that this thing was sitting a little proud, and lo and behold, we could not pass that spacer over. So this was due to the aftermarket bars. Obviously you cannot get original handlebars, so these aftermarket ones had a burr on the bottom side that stopped that pushing all the way down. But we continue assembly, we get the sliding mechanism in, we got plenty of grease, and we go to fit the brand new throttle itself, or the rotating assembly. And I actually find out, and I've seen on other videos, that the new ones don't always work. For some reason, I do not know, but we stuck with the original one as it wasn't worn and I wanted this thing to work. But please bear that in mind, I've seen it happen with a few different restorations where people use the new throttle and it doesn't give you full travel. With the throttle on at the top end, I wanted to move to the rear of the bike and look at the back brake. So first thing I looked at was this spline, and I noticed that when I'd built the rear wheel, I'd actually managed to put the spline 180 degrees out. So to get around that, I had the fun job of getting the rear wheel off. So it went up on the Honda stand, I had someone hold the bike, and the rear wheel came off, so I could then approach getting it flipped over. Now this is annoying and it wasn't something I looked for at the start, but essentially you have to pop that drum off and you have to flip this pin. So with some brute force I pulled it apart and then literally a quick 180 of that pin, and you're now set in the right position so the brake lever will sit where you want. Now, I never really designed the Honda stands for maintenance, but this is a great example of where they do come in very handy. It's just a nice way to get your bike off the floor so you can do minor bits of work like this. If you don't have a way of getting a bike up, as a lot of people know, it is a pain to get the rear wheel off these things. Then with the rear wheel back in place, the bike comes off the stand and we can go back to where we started to look at that brake lever. So we've got the full assembly, so you've got the push rod linkage, you've got a spring, and then you've got that arm that connects to the brake drum. So I loosened off the axle bolt, and that allows you to pull the swing arm out enough just so you can slide that in that small gap. Don't be fooled, it looks tight, but you can get it in there. And then it's a job of tightening up these bolts, getting it all fitted together and located, and then you can get it set on the right tooth on that spline. And the front is very easy. Simply hook it through your brake pedal arm, and then it's a washer and a split pin just to hold it in place, and then all of your adjustment is done on the rear of the brake, so nothing much more to do up here. At this point I moved to the rear to do some initial adjustment, and I do recommend not going crazy on the adjustment. You will have to do your chain after, and your chain will dictate your brake position and your wheel position, so that does get affected when you do that. So with that in mind, we open up a chain, a brand new chain for this bike, because it'd be crazy to do anything else. And to get this chain fitted, essentially your side cover comes off, so those 3 screws, nice and easy, and then you've got to cut this thing down to length. I'm sure there are a few different methods of people setting their chain lengths for cutting. Mine is pretty simple. Get it wrapped round, get your wheel in the most forward position, and then pick the point where you think you've got enough slack to tighten up as the rear wheel moves backwards, not forgetting that you have a split link in there as well. So I do that, and then this comes off the bike and onto a bench, and this is my way of doing it. I like to take a small sanding wheel and knock down the pin that I want to remove, and then that allows me just to get a punch and knock that pin the whole way through. You've got to make sure you've got something solid underneath so it doesn't move around, but essentially then you can knock it through and your chain is split. Then we can bring it back over to the bike, hook it up, and you always look and think that's not quite right, and that's because you're normally going to be a tooth out, you're going to have some slack, but this is where having your wheel all the way forward means you can just pull it back on the adjusters and get the tightness you need. So that works well, and then it's just a case of setting these positions like this, lining up the mark you want, and then winding your lock nuts down on the back so that rear wheel does not go anywhere. And now we're starting to really piece the bike back together. This side case is hopefully going on for the last time, and I can actually pull out another painted part, which is the side cover, which has been sat on the shelf for years now. So that goes on with some fresh hardware, and it really does finish off these bikes. You forget what they look like when you've had them stripped down in pieces for so long. At this point, it was a small moment of admiration, just enjoying the bike and the progress, and we're going to move on to some more fun jobs. Now for a bit of story time. I want to run you through this carburettor, this top end setup, and the issues I've faced in the process. So if any of you are looking to do something similar, you know what you're going to come across. So obviously we ran the bigger head and barrel, the 88cc kit, and to accommodate that it is suitable to run a bigger carb. So on screen I'm going to have close-ups the whole way through showing you the details. So the first thing is you're running this bigger carb. It's a different size, it's much bigger, it's different throttle linkage, and they're all things you need to consider. With the carb you also have a different manifold. Because it's a bigger inlet, it fits to that differently, so you need to factor in that. One of the next things and the biggest problems that I have had is the throttle cable length. So the standard throttle doesn't work, and to get around that you can get a custom length cable, which I have gone and done. There's someone that makes them in the grey original colour. They look great. But what I've been facing and I have been working on is figuring out how to get that throttle cable to sit correctly in your carburettor. So obviously you have your throttle slide which goes up and down in your carb as seen on screen now, and that is what you want to be sitting in the right place at idle. If that's all the way up, you're technically replicating full throttle. So you need to make sure that at idle, at no throttle, that is sat down with a small gap. The issue I had, due to the way this throttle cable, shown on screen now, matches up to the top of this housing, I could not get that throttle to sit low enough. So I've had to go in and do some modifications as shown now. So the first one we've got is a modified top plate to the carb. So I've had to drop that in the lathe, I've had to turn it down and try and reduce that height so my throttle cable essentially sits further in to the carb than it would originally. Alongside that, I've taken the 90-degree piece that takes it from the horizontal angle down to the vertical plane, and I have threaded that some more so that goes even further. One thing to bear in mind, it is a super weird thread. It's a 6 by 0.75mm pitch, so it's a fine thread metric, so bear that in mind if you're thinking about doing it. And what you're left with essentially is, hopefully now, I'm going to assemble this. I'm going to have my new carb, my nice fresh cylinder head, my lovely throttle cable, my original throttle, and it should go together and the carb will operate as it should. So I'm going to do the assembly now, and hopefully you've enjoyed that little bit of info on how to get around this problem. So first things first, we take that throttle cable and we assemble the top end that goes into the carb, and this is essentially the part that sets your cable height. So for now we've got that wound all the way in because we need it as low as possible, and you can see here we've got that small gap at the bottom which I'm very much hoping is enough for it to idle nicely and not have any issues. So a quick check just to make sure it does work, and then we can go about putting the carb assembly onto the bike. It is 2 bolts on that manifold, and we have added a new gasket just to make sure there are no air leaks and it is nice and sealed. Coming to the home straight now on jobs left to do, we look at the brake light switch, which is simply adding a spring, cutting it and bending it into the switch. Essentially what you need is, when you press the brake pedal, you want it to pull on this piston, which will then turn your brake light on. So I set this where I think is correct, and then luckily this threaded part allows you to lift it up or down as needed to make sure it's working. I have been so set on getting this bike running. There are things that have slipped, there are other things that have taken priorities, but I was determined to have this engine running. And as part of that, I wanted to have a seat on the bike because I didn't want to be sitting on the nice frame, risk damaging it or just damaging myself on some of the metal parts. So I have pulled out the old seat as a temporary measure to have the bike complete so I can run it. And don't worry, I touch on it in a bit in this video, but this is not the final seat. When I do the first ride, I'm going to add that seat and those really small bits that just finish it off. But for now, this will be perfect, and you know what? It doesn't look that bad, and as you can tell, I'm very, very chuffed with it. Guys, I do need to reiterate, the seat is not final. A new one is on its way, but they're a bit of a long lead time, and I thought when I'm starting this thing for the first time, I want to see, I don't want to scratch anything else up more than I already have. So it's on temporarily, so do not panic. I would be a criminal to go to all this effort and leave the original seat. Well, not the original, a not perfect seat. If it was original and lovely, it would still be on the bike. And some really small details that I'm adding back are the new straps that hold the cables on your front handlebars.
just a nice thing to have, and they do make a difference. They tidy up that front end and stop the cables slapping around. And then, of course, it would be criminal not to fit them, the grips. And to fit these, I use the old hairspray method. I've done this for mountain bike grips over the years. Cover it in hairspray. It goes nice and slippery, so you can slide it on, and then it will dry off and won't go anywhere. So, a bit of brute force, I slide those on, and we now have some grips ready for this thing to get started. Being the CT70, we have a larger electrical system on the bike opposed to the 50, and as part of that you have a small 6-volt battery. So actually what is quite funny is you cannot buy a battery with acid anymore. So I originally bought one and it had no acid and I couldn't get any, so it was completely useless. Luckily I was able to get my hands on one of these older ones that comes with the acid as part of the kit. So I'm not sure how you get round that at the moment, or whether these will be supplied as gel batteries or something similar. And before starting this bike, I really just wanted to put some fresh oil in and have peace of mind that I was covered in this area. It was a long time since the engine ran and I just wanted to be sure it had some good oil in it. And during the oil change, I'm also going to get rid of this old sump plug and move to a nice magnetic one that picks up any loose bits of metal or gearbox shrapnel or any things like that. So quick job and peace of mind that it's sorted. And now guys, it is time to get into the real good bit of this video, where we're going to commission the bike and get it ready for its first start. So that battery goes in. It's been fully charged on a really slow cycle, and it plugs together with the fuse going in that small holder, the battery strap on top, and then this lovely rubber cover that just seals it all off. And as you saw, the oil came out of the bike, so we need to put some fresh in, and people have said to me before, use mineral oil. I've had comments about it, so we've got some fresh mineral oil, and this will be what's used in the bike as part of the bedding process. So we put 0.75 litres into this bike. The case says 0.8, online says 0.7. I wasn't quite sure, so I went bang in the middle, and I'll keep an eye on it on the dipstick. So we get that all topped up and added in, and then we drop the dipstick in, and I check that off camera, and I'm happy with how that level is sitting. Now I want to make sure the oil is in the right parts of the engine. So to do that, I'm going to essentially pump the oil on the oil pump, and I'm going to take the plug out to get rid of the compression, so it's nice and easy to turn over. And essentially I'm just going to sit there and crank this engine. It's really nice and easy, as you can hear. And I'm going to do this until I'm happy the oil has made its way around the engine. This isn't essential, as when you do start it, the oil pump will come in, but I wanted to be sure. And as part of this, whilst it's out, let's check if we have a spark. And to my, not amazement, but happiness, we had a strong spark, so that was one thing ticked off for this first start. At this point, we've got a battery, we've got fresh oil, and we've got oil pumped around the engine, and we've now got a nice spark. So next up is the fuel. So with the seat up, we add a cup of fresh fuel in there. We haven't gone crazy, because if it leaks, I don't want a full tank to deal with, and we're not going to be running this bike for long, so I'm not too worried. We turn down that fuel tap, and you can see the fuel flow through the filter and into the carb, which is a good sign. At this point, it's time to attempt a first start, and I'm going to talk less in this section so you can watch it unfold, and I will stop in every now and then so you can see what happens.
Nah. I don't feel good. It's turning over, but it feels like when I was kicking it. I've had this before on the other one where the clutch was steam. It's a manual clutch, so I'm trying to nip that bolt up and check it wasn't loose enough where you don't want it to go. Hopefully I haven't fucking mangled those teeth. It's really fucked them. No, it's slipping. It's here.
Can I give it a description? Let me have a look. I'm slipping the clutch, I think. I've got some clutch issues. That doesn't it? That's because you've got the big head on it. Doesn't it sound nice? It's not the idle, don't I? Put the choke out. Choke's off.
It runs nicely, just a little bit of a...
Sounds a bit peppy, doesn't it? That's from the baffling as well. 100% taking that baffle out. So, as you guys have seen, it did run, but we had some small issues with the clutch, similar to the semi-autos where they're not adjusted correctly. Essentially, when I'm kicking the bike, I am slipping the clutch, so that's purely due to clutch adjustment. And I've also got the high idle issue, which I am putting down to my throttle cable still being too short. So to get around that, I've popped the cable off. I'm dropping the slide back in so it sits at the bottom, and I'm purely going to get this bike running on the carb idle adjustment just to prove that it is the throttle cable length. So I drop that back in, and we're going to go back through the process of just trying to get it run and get a nice idle, and we'll fix these small issues down the line. So the top cap goes back on, and you can see a close-up here, and what I'm going to do now is go through trying to start the bike again, and as you can see we go through the process of kicking it and not quite getting it to run and having to tinker with it as we go. So it was a process of kick it, does it cough, wind that idle up a little bit, and just try and find the point where we can get an idle. It's not ideal doing this because you're not using the throttle cable setup, but for now I just wanted an idling bike as we see here. And that, guys, is going to bring us to the end of this video. I really hope you have enjoyed it. We have got a few jobs to finish off, and then we'll be taking this thing up the road for a test ride. Hope you all enjoy it, and I will catch you in the next one.